Hi, everybody. Celia Waterhouse here with OnPoint Mentors. Thank you for joining us on our panel discussion. We've got a great topic today with some great facilitators, mentors, coaches. I'm so excited today. So our topic today is going to be on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can we have an authentic conversation, please? And leading this topic is Marville, who is a mindfulness and motivational coach with an expertise in wellness, meditation, and transformation. Before I turn it over to Shay, though, I want to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves and tell us what your expertise is and why you're particularly interested in discussing this topic on this panel discussion. So I'll turn it over. Let's turn it over to you, Ishreen, first.
Thank you, Celia. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you this evening, or maybe this morning, depending on when you're watching this. I'm really passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what I call belonging, which is why I've set up an organization called Belonging Pioneers. And what we do is we go into organizations and we support them in creating a culture in which everybody can experience a sense of belonging. Everybody can experience an equity of opportunity. And how I got here is really through my passion, my core belief that everybody should have a fair crack at work. And when it comes to an authentic conversation, I've so far published one book, and it's called Authentic You. And it's about how you can win at work by being your authentic self. So this is just a perfect conversation for me. So thank you for having me on here.
Thanks for joining us. Manisha.
Thank you, Celia. So Manisha Pattani, my background is in technology, specializing in service management and transition. I have been in the corporate world for several years as a specialist in transition, as a IT consultant, specifically looking at stakeholder engagement, outsourcing programs, digital transformation more recently. And I'm also, I'm a former executive board member at Women in Banking and Finance. I was also a former member at the Anita Borg Institute. And alongside my kind of roles, if you like, I have also been quite interested and quite intrigued by culture change. I have led groups of mentors, and actually as a mentor, I specialize or my passion is really about helping people achieve their end result. And I realized in that journey, as I kind of explored the corporate world and kind of climbed up the ladder, what diversity and inclusion was really about firsthand. And therefore it's a topic that's quite close to my heart, speaking from experience. So I'm really grateful and appreciate you inviting me to this panel discussion. And I look forward to having this conversation. It's a conversation that I think, the more and more I get invited to panels to speak about it, the more and more interesting it gets for me. It's a conversation that really fires people up, in many ways. It can get emotional. It can get, quite exciting because what the future might hold as we kind of, sort of really go, more deeper into levels of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what that means, not just in the workplace, but also personally and at a wider society level as well, because that really has a massive influence. So yeah, I'm pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. All right, Shay, our moderator, take it away.
Well, it is my pleasure to participate, and I thank you, Celia, for organizing this, because I don't think it's one conversation, it's many conversations. And before I was a mindfulness teacher, although I've been practicing mindfulness and meditation for 35 years, I've been teaching for 20, but I was quite involved in politics for a long time. And my degrees are in political science and anti-racism training. And so I was sort of doing anti-racism and social activism and looking at the relationship between bias and science 20 years ago. I used to work for the Ontario Science Centre as a researcher. And so it's exciting to see where we've come in such a well, not a short period. It's been a long time coming, but it's exciting to see where we are now and to see that diversity is more than identity, that it speaks to so many different parts of who we are and our cognitive diversity and the way we work and the way, all the different things that help us to be human beings. But, we also know that we're living in a very polarized world, and it's harder and harder to have conversations about the things that really are impacting us. I mean, we could just look at what's happening with Meghan Markle and Prince Harry right now. Henry, that's someone else. Prince Harry right now with that big interview with Oprah Winfrey and sort of the bombshell conversation that they had. And then sort of the bombshell reaction has been extremely polarized. And I think it's unfortunate, actually, that we are back into like this firestorm of difference rather than looking at what we have, in common. So I was wondering, what, like, since it's such a hot topic, what do you think about starting with that conversation?
I love it. I love it.
How timely.
Very timely, very timely. And I just watched it last night, so it's fresh in my mind.
Well, what did you think?
Of which part in particular?
Well, what was your overall impression? Did you leave being a fan of the Sussex, or did you leave thinking, they're trying to destroy the monarchy?
Well, anything that I watch or I read in general, or a conversation I have, I always try to look at it from all perspectives, right? What is this person thinking, or this institution, or this culture thinking, and try to figure out what pieces of a puzzle make up why they're viewing it in a certain perception. So I never look at it from who's right, who's wrong. Yes. I like to look at the energy and the dynamics of a conversation, the body language, the topics they steer towards, when someone sits up and wants to be forceful. So I don't, I'm not taking sides, and that's not a cop-out. It's just because I love watching and studying human behavior and seeing. I am an American, born and raised, but I have lived in various different countries. I've lived in Australia. I lived in Italy. I've lived in different parts of the United States. I lived in Japan. So I have seen a lot of different perspectives of different cultures, and have personally experienced it. So I try not to make any judgments. So again, not a cop-out, so I'm not going to choose sides.
I understand. Ishreen, what's your perspective? Do you have a perspective? Did you watch? I shouldn't assume.
I watched it on Monday night, and I'm pretty much like Celia. I don't really like to take sides about these things, but what I was left with was a huge sense of sadness for the family. It's like a family in crisis, right?
Yes.
Which family in particular? Meghan and Harry's?
They're all one family.
Yeah.
As far as I don't know if it's because I come from an Asian background, but for me, that's the family all the way back to the grandparents,
Yes.
And you could see, following on from what Celia was saying, you could see where certain decisions were taken and what drove them. When Meghan told Harry, you can't trust me to stay by myself, and he had to take her to the Royal Albert Hall that night, he had no choice but to leave. He had no choice but to leave because he'd seen that with his mum.
Yes.
And the heartache of your dad not returning your calls, you know, and then the heartache for the royal family of having to break with tradition and everything they knew, you know. So I was just left with a whole sense of sadness for the family. And Shay, I don't know how the statistics are or how they're reporting it in Canada or in America, but here a lot of the focus seems to be, oh well, the under 45s are with Meghan and Harry, and the over 45s are with the firm.
Right.
And so that's kind of interesting. And then the I guess the other piece that's there for me is how it's polarized the world, which is
Mm-hmm.
just incredible. And I've recently joined Clubhouse, and I'm, you know, dropping in and out of different groups. And there seem to be a lot of groups about Meghan and Harry this week, right? So I'm just
Yes.
into it. Funnily enough, the populations in those groups are mostly people of color and female.
Mm.
Angry. They're just
Angry.
angry. And all they're talking about is colonialism and structural racism and this ain't right, and you know,
Yes.
the valid
And
thing.
how does that resonate with you though? Is that a space that makes sense mentally to
Yeah.
you?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's
Yeah.
all true. It's all true. It's truth, right? It's their truth. It's our truth. But my point of view is, you know, you're spending a lot of energy being angry, and I'm not sure how useful that is. I get you need to speak about these things. I get I need to speak about these things. You know, um, I my husband's family are African American. My father-in-law was a bishop of a church there, and in his early days, in his youth, so to speak, he set up a consulting firm that worked in anti-racism and equality and diversity and equity and inclusion. And he was involved in the Million Man March and all of that, right? It's kind of sidetracking a little bit, but I hope it's okay. But
Of course.
he came to visit us in the UK a few years before he died, and I think he knew he was going to die because he had cancer. And he brought this stack of files about all his work from the 1970s and said, Ishreen, you're going to continue this work.
Wow.
And he said, you're
Wow.
going to, and you know what, I am continuing this work. So I'm passionate about creating anti-racist cultures, but I think it's a two-way thing. And I do totally appreciate that as people of color, colonialism and structural racism has had a huge impact, but I think we need to move beyond being angry if we're going to
Mhm.
get the outcome that we want.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
What do you think, Shay?
Oh, I think Manisha was going to.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. And can you guys hear me okay?
I
Is everything-
can.
Okay, great. Manisha?
Thank you.
Yes.
So, I mean, wow, that's really interesting and lovely to hear. You know, Celia, your perspective, and also Ishreen, yours as well. I feel it's really interesting, right? Because I think the issue is quite real, and obviously people, you know, it's only been just aired, so obviously the reaction is very fresh, it's raw. And I think obviously, you know, given time, people's attitudes and opinions will change, right?
Yeah.
And my own perspective is, you know, I mean, if I sit there and think about it, if you take it, you know, if you remove the royal kind of status,
Yes.
which family does not have
Stuff.
say
Stuff.
issues? Which family is so functional that
Yeah.
they've never had a disagreement or never had, you know, difference in opinions that have created tension, right?
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, when all is said and done, you know, sometimes you blow your, you know, you lose your cool, you say I'm sorry, you say I love you, and everything's fine. And it's not aired in public. And the fact that because it's aired in public because of the royal status, right?
Yes. Yes.
It means everyone has an opinion.
Yes.
But more interestingly, right, if I bring it back to your question, Shirley, around and particularly in this topic around diversity, equity, and inclusion, what I'm really, really intrigued by is if you look at what, at a very, very basic level, right, if you look at what Meghan and Harry's interview was about, and if I take, what my takeaway was, they felt unsupported.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
They did not get the support that they were looking for, whether it was right or wrong, who from, take all of that out of the equation, right? Just at a very, very basic level, it was about support and not getting the support. And I think, the association with DEI, if I may call it that, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is very, very similar. If you take inclusion, right, and I for me, diversity is not even a topic of conversation anymore, because everyone's diverse. You just have to look at nature, right? You look at nature. Nature is diverse, so it's just it's there, right, in your face. So let's move on, right? For me, it's about inclusion, and Ishreen used the word belonging, which I really love, right? Because it is about creating that sense of belonging. And when you feel unsupported, you don't have that sense of belonging, right? You feel unsupported, you feel, it's attitudes, it's access, it's openness or lack thereof. And I think that is very, very interesting for me from a, the topic that we're discussing on our panel today. And I think that's where it gets really, really interesting, especially, and I speak from experience, right? Coming, from a corporate culture, working in blue chip companies, it is hard, it is tough, right? And from both sides, right? From a leadership perspective, where as leaders, and I being a senior leader myself,
Yes.
Creating an environment where my team and the extended team feel included and not feeling left out is very, very important. We all talk about authenticity, right?
Yep.
But what really is authenticity? And I hear the phrase too often where people say, bring your whole self to work. But what is that? It's not just wearing jeans and a casual, being casual on a Friday or any day of the week, right? It is an environment. And to me, and this is like, and Meghan and Harry's interview is so timely for this topic. So I'm really, really pleased that we bring this, so we associate it to that. But it's for me, it's about being, you went for an interview, you got offered a role, so you're invited, right? It's like being at a party, right? You get invited to a party, so you're there, right? You went for your interview, you were successful, you passed, they offered you the job, so you're there, so you're invited, right? But once you're there, and when you feel as if the host didn't even see you, you were so invisible to the host that you may as well not have been at the party. That's what inclusion really is for me, is how do you create that environment where people feel they're seen, they're heard, their ideas matter. It's not even being, woman of color, and coming from a tech background, women in tech is so high up on that, the phrase. That almost every tech company now has statistics on how to balance out when they're interviewing, not just at a graduate level, but even at a senior level. And obviously, when you start to get to see, the C-suite level, that's when you start to see the statistics really drop. And so obviously, and that's widely known. It's, everyone knows that. And there are factors that contribute to that, and some are very real, especially with women. But it is quite interesting, because it's creating that in environment where you're heard, you're noticed.
Yeah.
Not just, I think it's not just about being a woman, or it's about men as well. And I think a lot of men also don't feel heard and seen. And sometimes it creates, you know, I remember one time when I was, speaking at what I was, actually no, I was Shay, I was you, I was moderating, and I remember leaving work that day, and someone sort of said, "Oh, where are you going?" And it kind of got, it was funny, but it was also kind of not funny, because it touches on biases a lot as well, what I'm about to say. It was, there was a group of people, some men, some women, but the men felt really like, well, it's a women conversation, so I'm not being invited, so I can't go. And I think that's so subtle, but also it is quite sensitive, because if they feel they're not included, that is also inclusivity for me, right?
Yes, yes.
So sorry, Shay, I think I'm
No,
talking.
no. I mean, oh, sorry, Ishreen, you were going to go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that's really interesting, because we've got a book club looking into and having conversations now about anti-racism. And these are 6 very highly professional who've been senior executives in corporate organizations. And we just got together and we said, you know what, let's have conversations. And let's increase our understanding of this subject. And we're already in the subject, right? Which is interesting. So there's one ex-army white man, there's one really successful Asian man, there's a Roman Catholic woman, white woman, there's another lovely woman who actually, I don't know her profession, but I really love her. And then there's an African-American woman who now lives here, and myself.
Yes.
And we're having these conversations, and I notice what's happening is each person is withdrawing into their underrepresented characteristic. Okay, so each
What does that mean?
I'm trying to.
They're
so,
withdrawn into their underrepresented characteristic.
So we're talking about different protected characteristics. I like to talk of them as underrepresented groups. Okay, so a big conversation at the moment here in the UK is the socioeconomic underrepresented group.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a big conversation. Then there's the race and underrepresented group. So what I'm noticing is that the white ex-army corporate person is feeling very threatened.
Yes.
He's feeling really threatened. And because we know each other and because we've been at senior professional levels, we can have open dialogues about this, and we can communicate our emotions, which most groups like this aren't able to do, right? So he's just, I'm getting really angry, and he's dealing with, that white fragility, which he didn't even know about before we started having the book club. So he's, and he's really vulnerable with it as well. The person from a lower socioeconomic background, when we're talking about anti-racism, is talking about, well, there are all these schools that I taught, and there were some white kids who were really underprivileged and have struggles. So, kind of like coming from that entrenched position, and then talking about the intention of the authors and the lack of integrity in the writing, not addressing anti-racism, which is what we're there to talk about. Right? We're not here to do is this author credible author? We're here to talk about anti-racism. But given that you're now in this defensive position of protecting your particular characteristic and not opening out and having an open dialogue, and so where we're coming to as an informed group now is really thinking, actually, we need to be championing the other person's anti-representation.
Mm,
To
mm.
really understand that and authentically champion that, and somebody else will champion me. And we
Can,
can
See, yeah, I see. It's so fascinating, right? Because I think we're all really an experience, right? We all are the sum of wherever and whatever we've been through in our life, and that.
Mhm.
oh,
oh
where'd she
Shay,
go? Shay, where'd you go?
someone's back.
You're back. You're back.
Oh my
Ah,
gosh! Oh my God! What's going
I
on?
just want to say, for the record, we did invite some white females, white males,
Yes.
and we ended up with us four. So Ishreen has a point.
But you
Yes.
know, we're it's a beginning conversation, right? Because
Exactly.
and I think one of the things that is important for all of us, and it's not beholden to the people who identify as being from a racialized background or from a
Mhm.
certain identity culture. It's for all of us to say, I want to be a part of having a conversation about what makes us more diverse so that we can be more inclusive, so that we can create more belonging, right? And I mean, there's so many things to unpack here. Like I'm thinking about 10 or 12 things right now that we could do a program on every month, for the next 12 and a half
Let's
months.
do it.
Let's do it. But just to go back to the conversation with Oprah Winfrey and Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, is that I actually, the conversation that I've been thinking about, I actually haven't heard a lot of. I think a lot of people have gotten into, colonialism and race and imperialism, and all those things are relevant. They inform where we are now, especially
Mhm.
if you're talking about the monarchy, right?
Mhm.
But then there's some other pieces about, the suffering that happens within a family,
Mhm.
the legacy of emotional pain, and that has no race, that has no gender, right? And then the fact that these are young, like I don't mean age now, but I'm talking about young in terms of being parents. They've just become parents, right? And the early stages of marriage and having a baby, all sorts of emotions
Mhm.
and things happen inside where you want to belong, you want to be a part of something,
Mhm.
and so I think there were opportunities actually in them deciding to have a conversation like that even though it was a bombshell moment to have the conversation, I think even the great Oprah Winfrey missed that opportunity to have a radical conversation about um, belonging and connection, and that in its relationship to mental well-being and emotional well-being. Right?
Mhm.
We we keep trying to solve problems by looking at the same lens. We've known for years and years about the history of the royal family, right? And we've known for years that they have dysfunction like every family, right? So why would we have the same analysis? Why would we be going after the same analysis to have a conversation with this couple? So I think there's something disingenuous about that, and it speaks to the idea of diversity, because I think we need to think about diversity in how we ask questions. Who's invited to the table? How do we listen? Are we listening for understanding, or are we listening to judge? And I feel troubled right now, actually, and this is not about Meghan and Harry. It's about the conversation around anti-racism, because I think there is so much hype and anger and agitation, and I'm going to say something that a lot of people don't like hearing because they think it's a cop out, which is, my God, if you look at where we are right now as a globe and as people compared to where we were 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Things have changed. Now,
Oh yeah.
does that mean that it's enough? Does it mean that it's the right amount? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But we have to be able to recognize what has, occurred as well. Do you know what I mean? And brought us to this point, and do we have the capability to have questions that create more space where people feel safe to have a conversation, or safe to be angry, to say, I can be angry within this. Like, I know sometimes women of color who are of Black descent or from the, African diaspora, they get uncomfortable about being angry, even if they have the right to be angry, because they don't want to fall into a stereotype. Why should they be that way?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or women who are from cultures where they're supposed to be demure and quiet. They feel like if they have to be opposite of that, because people won't take them as who they are. So I think we have to be so careful about careful about stereotyping, even as we go through the process of trying to unpack all of this historical nonsense and garbage around race, which isn't even fully real.
Well, watching this interview last night, and again, I like to look at perspectives of different parties. If you look at diversity of values, okay, never mind color or culture, diversity of values, right? So you look at, diversity of the individual values. What are Harry's top values? Again, he didn't want to repeat history. He was traumatized. He wants to look after his family. Meghan's values, she wants freedom. She felt like trapped. Oprah's values, she wants to sell, airtime, right?
Yes.
She wants to sell this. And even though she's, a wonderful person and a great interviewer, she has to create a program that millions of people are going to watch. So she's asking questions that's causing controversy, pain, and to bring it all to the surface, because sensationalism gets people watching.
Yes.
Then you think, what are the values of, the individual royals, whether you're talking about the Queen or William or Kate or Charles, and then you're talking about the firm. What are the values of the firm, the institution, right? And every piece is going to play according to their highest values, right? So, and if people can only recognize that, the institution values this, that's how it was able to survive for this long, then you can say, that's why they're treating the situation this way. Or if someone, says, Meghan really wants her freedom back, let's say, and she's not addicted, but, she's got this fantasy that she can be free. Well, she's attracting the opposite, right?
Interesting perspective.
So when you are like, so fantasizing about how something should be, you're going to attract the opposite, instead of realizing what are the benefits of that situation. I feel Italian, just moving my hands a lot. So instead of saying, what are the benefits of me being, restricted from doing things? What can I do to meet my values and to serve others? Because she does like to serve people. And by this role, she's able to do that. But she felt trapped, instead of seeing it as a blessing that she can use this platform to serve even more, greater numbers of people. So I always try to look at it like, and that's always been my real strong piece is, and I got it from Dr. DeMartini, is, understanding each individual values and each organization's values. And if you look at it, pull yourself out and look at it, then you see how everything is in play.
That's so interesting. So interesting.
It's really great that you mentioned that, Celia, because when you touched on human behavior, I was really pleased that you did, because everything, we're all human, and what's playing out is human behavior. And I really love that you take it right back to values, and love Dr. DiMartino myself. So it is really about, misalignment of values in some ways. But if you can, and if you can connect that back to our topic of conversation, is also about, values do play a huge role, right? There's the values of the individual, there's values of team, there's values of culture, there's values of the organization, there's values of the leadership team and them as individuals. And what's playing out is at an egoic level is human behavior, right?
Yeah.
And not, and I say this, the reason why I say egoic level is because that's, kind of our default mode of operation, generally, right? And to sit back and kind of say, well, what's the highest, what would your higher self do with this situation, right? Is often a question that doesn't normally occur from a human behavior perspective so quickly and so easily when you're caught up in a situation. But I love the fact that you brought that in, because Dr. John DiMartino always talks about values, but he also and he also talks about challenge and support, and that's also what plays out in this sort of subject, right? Is also support and challenge. So that's I really love the connection you make.
And belonging.
Yeah.
Ishreen, yes.
There are a couple of things you said, Shay, that I want to echo, because I really agree. I don't think Oprah did herself any favors through this interview, to be honest. I think she was not her usual probing self.
Right. Yes.
She was like, a benevolent aunt asking her niece some questions and trying to be therapeutic. And I don't know how that'll play out for her. And it was also blatantly commercial, right? With all those snippets that she sent. And in the UK, I don't know how it is in America and Canada, but every time somebody talks about the interview on the television or on the radio, they're having to say something about Harpo and kind of like
productions.
I'm like, what? Like, which of the production the producer's name in front of every time you talk about it? I don't think she did herself any favors. And the other point I wanted to pick up on that you said, Shay, that I thought was really interesting is the amount of progress we actually have made already. 2 years ago, 2019, we were working with a client, and it was about anti-racism, and we were like, we really should talk about the history of racism here, because it's a critical conversation.
Yes.
Actually, we're leading this to a group of white people. I'm brown, my colleagues mixed race, Jamaican English, and we thought, do you know what, they're not going to be able to receive it. So we had to water it right down.
Yes,
And talk about it, but in a very gentle way. And they still felt reactivated. And that's just 2 years ago. Now, I can't stop talking about it, because people are like, talk to me about white fragility. Teach us about the history of race. And we've got to learn that, in 2 years, that shift has happened.
Oh, I think, and I think that, again, it's about our experience, right? You're so right. Like, it's about our experience. It's about how long we've lived on the earth and what we've seen and what we have lived. And so I think we have to be very cognizant of how much do we bring to the table that is political, and how much is it of our lived experience. And I, as an educator, I focus on helping people with the skills for listening, for learning to listen to hard things, sitting with things that are uncomfortable. But then you need, like, to Celia's point about values, in order to look at values, you also have to have a value for where you are at, right? You have to be able to value, what do I have here? You know, and how can I take what I have here and grow it into something more and more for all of us, you know? So I think there's just so many things right now, even though, you know, I know the word woke is overused. You know, there's a lot of wokeness, there's a lot of awakeness, I would say, from a mindfulness point of view, about these issues that we could never speak about in polite relations before. So I think that's great. But now it's to the point where sometimes we're not talking to people who disagree with us. We're not talking about things that are outside of the identity stuff, right? Like, I think cognitive diversity, creating space for different ways of learning, different ways to enter a subject matter, these things are really important, especially for our young people. Right. And you enter every room as a human being before you have your name, your race, your gender, your you know, your sexuality, your everything. And so I'm glad we have those things, but you don't want to be hemmed in. That's always my fear. I don't want to be put into such a box that I have to operate. My character comes from that box, you know? So, but the last thing about the Meghan Harry thing is that I do think there's a interesting cultural war there between American and British culture, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
you see, and excuse me if this is ignorant. I don't mean it to be. I'm saying it as somebody who's from England, who raised in Canada, England, and is of Guyanese descent. But saturated in American culture, obsessed with American culture. I always give you my bias. But I think American culture, it has this lack of understanding about British culture. And I think British culture has this assumption about the vulgarity of American culture. And so there's this lens, you're vulgar and you're old, you're vulgar and you're old. And so then they tried to have a conversation with one another about, you know, one of the oldest legacies in British culture, in British history, without any context.
So funny.
And it's just hilarious. The very thing that they're trying to expose is the thing that they are, you know, expressing.
Right.
So it was just kind of, again, we keep getting closed in these rooms that are these boxes. I'm this and you're that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're so right about the two countries. I mean, we're sitting watching the interview last night, and I have an Australian husband, right? He loves his queen.
Yes.
He does love his queen. And I lived in Australia for 13 years. I understand how important she is. And I have a lot of English friends. Yay. And so I do understand how important the institution is and the idea of the royals. But from an American standpoint, I was trying to explain both sides. You know, I'm like, well, you think this way, the English think this way. Americans, you know, we left.
Yes.
And I said, so the royals aren't in our, you know, are in our, you know, in front of our heads here, in our thoughts. And you know, the fact that she didn't realize she had to curtsy, you know, he was like, I can't believe that. I'm like, well, we didn't grow up with that. So I wasn't trying to defend. I was trying to explain, you know, the situation and what was going on. But you are right. There is the, you know, again,
cultural nuance.
Why do Americans don't wear masks? You know, because why should I? It's my right, right? They ran away, right?
Yes.
So, so it's an interesting point you brought up, Shay.
Yeah.
it's the whole thing is really, I mean, and I think, you know, here's the struggle, and I'd really be curious to know what you all think, you know, about the conversation about inclusion and that you have in the room with people that you are with, and then the conversation that happens in social media, right? And how do you feel like we are, like I made a statement that I think we're better, but do you all agree that we have, you know, kind of grown and become something else now?
We've grown and become something else, but I think it's different
Mm.
for different underrepresented groups. So
Yes.
and I know, you know, we're all different, and but you do have themes, right? I think the gender conversation's gone almost into reverse, sadly.
What do you mean by that? This is good. Yes.
You know,
Yeah, because I think I know what you mean, but what, like, could you, like, what can
so
you explore?
yeah, so you know, 10 years ago when I did my research into what women are struggling with at work, professional women, and wrote the book, there was a lot of enthusiasm about getting women into senior levels and, you know, progressing at work and so forth. There was a lot of focus on that. And, you know, over the last 10 years, 2011 to 2021, there's been the Davis report in the UK, there's been the Hampton Alexander review. And these are all kind of clangos that are designed to enable a higher percentage of females at leadership levels and at all levels in the organization. And they've had some level of success. If you think 33% is success, when the majority, you know, females are 51% of the population. And it's kind of like that job's been done, right? And that job so hasn't been done. You
No,
know?
has not been done. Manisha, what do you think in terms of tech? You must see, like, in terms of technology.
100%.
It's like, what is it, like 10% the leadership roles of females?
Less.
It's less. It's less. Yeah.
The senior you go, the numbers really drop.
Yeah.
And there are some real hard reasons for that as well. So it's not just, you know, like women have children, you know, women takes, you know, and that has a massive impact, right? You can't but then you have to, you know, you have to then talk about, well, again, it's about support, right? Is there a support system in place that helps women to have children and have families? Because you shouldn't have to compromise, right? Just because you want to, you know, have a career and progress and be successful should not mean that you need to give up having a family and having children either. So where's the support system that allows you? And I think it's the Netherlands that I hear quite often that, you know, have, you know, unlike some other sort of countries, have a system in place for, you know, sort of supporting women in doing that. But at a corporate level, at a level of society, I mean, you know, and this touches on so many other topics as well, which is probably we're not going to be able to cover in this conversation. But, you know, biases, right? You know, it's about, you know, women have children and can't be going to work, and, you know, and you even if you don't want to be controversial, you end up having a conversation that is quite,
take a stand.
Quite sensitive for some people.
Yes.
And it's a hard conversation to have sometimes, especially with your boss, right?
Yes.
And so, to, you know, the long answer to your question is the stats really drop, and it's much less. And even though they're trying to say that, you know, we want more women in technology, and yes, that is true to a degree. And you know, it's easier to do that at entry level. But once you're at mid management, and you get to sort of, you know, senior leadership level, it becomes more trickier to retain the talent, right? And it is about retaining that talent, because if you've had and this is not just about women, right? if you've had an individual, men or women, with your organization for 10 years, you've invested 10 years in that individual.
Precisely.
And then if they, it could be cultural reasons, and I don't mean, I mean organizational culture,
Yes,
right? It
yes,
could be
sir.
cultural issues that lead someone to leave. It could be compensation related that, leads someone to leave. It could be diversity or inclusion related. It could be personal, right? Something's going on in their personal life. It could be that they're talented, and what they want to do is pursue their talent, not just in the corporate field, but also extend that into having their own business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of these things play out in that, and so there are reasons why it drops. Some are real, and some are reasons that you could have avoided if you had invested more in inclusivity, in compensation, in rewards, in creating a sense of belonging in an environment and a culture that really supports them. All of these things, I think are things that you can do to sort of bring about that change. But as with with every change, there's a cycle, right? There's denial, there's acceptance, and then there's, okay, so where's the solution now, right? So I think,
Yes.
and then bring into that pot human behavior, bring into that pot colonialism and anti-racism and values, right? That creates a whole different sort of potion of where we can go from here. So I think there's a long way to go. I think we've come a long way for sure. Ishreen touched on gender, and certainly in the UK there's been so much, and it's become such old news now, but I'll mention it anyway, on the gender pay gap.
Yes.
Is another thing, right? And it's also real. It's a real problem when you get to a certain level, and it's not in every place. It's not in every organization and institution. I was having a conversation with a friend, and in fact found out that there was a woman that was being paid much higher than the man who at that same level, which is usually unheard of, right? But it does happen. So it's not, and I give you that example because I don't want to generalize, but that is also, a real issue that needs a solution. And obviously, there are things in motion to change that, to help that, and to improve that. But as with any change, it takes time to bring that about, to really get the conversation going, to get people behind and supporting and backing the project or the topic of conversation. And I think similarly with diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think that's not, let's be cognizant of the fact that we've come a long way from several years ago, but there's still work to be done. And I think even generations after us will probably still have some work to do.
And don't you think also that there's so much risk involved, right, in also advocating for yourself and for others? So people I think a lot of people are tired, they get fatigued, and then it's easy, and some of these things are invisible until it happens to you, right? I wonder, Celia, I wonder what, like, in terms of the pandemic, they've called it the she-demic as well, right? That women's lives have changed dramatically because of trying to juggle the work and the personal life, having to do the labor of mothering and parenting and domestic chores. Like, do you think that the pandemic is creating opportunity for us to see a better way in terms of gender, or do you think that women are going to be further behind because of the pandemic?
I personally don't think the two are connected. I think the pandemic has brought about a lot of opportunities for people Well, to do a couple of things. One, reflect on what's important and valuable to them. You know, is it family? Is it career? Is it whatever it's going to be? People are becoming more self-aware. And I think that, you know, technologically, the pandemic has, you know, we're on Zoom. We're on all different places on the world. And here we're speaking. But in terms of women, you know, I've never been, I'm not a feminist. I'm not the opposite. I never really thought of myself as a woman. I just think of myself as Celia, who's trying to move forward with a cause.
Mm.
And if it's anything, my father, who's from the Philippines, you know, he's 86, still going strong, thank God. But he tells me stories all the time about when he was in the US Navy and sitting on the bus. Where do you sit on the bus? You know, this is in his lifetime. He is still alive and kicking and going strong. But what he's always instilled in me is don't compare yourself to others. You just be you, and you try to be the best you that you can be. Don't let anybody tell you where you are in line.
Yes.
And so whether you're female, he only had 2 girls, you know, whether you're female, whether you're male, whether you're black, white, purple, yellow, whatever color, whether you're educated, uneducated, you know, because he didn't have a college degree, but he hangs out with doctors, lawyers, PhDs. He does not think he's any lesser than anybody else. And he just goes with it and jokes around with everybody. I mean, he's really been a great role model for me, that it's not about color, disability, or ability. You know, it's not about gender. He taught me to be colorblind, ability blind, you know, gender blind, so that you see everybody as equals. Because once you start to bring that into play, for example, my husband and I were meeting with a couple of consultants, and I was talking about her the other day, and John says, which one was she? I said, oh, she's the pregnant one. And he goes, okay, she just happens to be African American. But now, well, actually, this was last year when we were talking about, you know, I was telling, remember her? And he goes, which one is she? I said, the pregnant one. He goes, oh, yeah, okay. And then now I see an African American woman, whereas before I didn't, because it is so in my face that I have to see color. And I don't want to see color. I've never seen color. You know, obviously, you know, I am a person of color, which is a term I absolutely hate, but that's what everyone's using now. It's like, well, how much color do I need to have to be a person of color? You know, it's like a diversity of melanin. I used to always say, you know, well, so I try not to look at people, individuals, humans, as what race they are, what gender they are, if they're disabled, able. It just doesn't concern me. Mm-hmm. And I hope that in our education system, because I think that our generation, the people that are on this planet now, it's almost too late for all of us. I think we need to, and I know all of you probably heard me talk about this, but I think we need to reprogram the babies that aren't even born yet and try to figure out how to instill this in our education system to be blind to all of those things. So we're not putting labels on people.
Yeah.
I think that's tough. I think it's tough.
It's tough.
I don't think there's anything wrong with seeing people and seeing and the diversity of what we are as human beings, right? I used to work with this anthropologist, and he used to say, you know, well, at this point, because this is a long time ago, he used to say there's he'd been to every part of the world, and he'd say, you know what, Shay, you know what I learned? There's 6.8 billion ways to be a human being. And so now I say there's 7.8 billion ways to be a human being. But I also recognize that we live in these states, and for, you know, at least for the last, you know, in the short history, the last 600 years, their categories and have been important for, domination. And I think domination, whether you call it, a certain white privilege, or you call it, a level of supremacy, or whatever words or terms you want to use, the base of this oppression and this way of categorizing people by how much melanin, or, what their face looks like or hair texture is about dominating. Right. And I think what we have to find a way to teach is how to create an inclusive society where we more like our nature that we exist in, more like the ecosystem we exist in, where there's competitive cooperation, right? There's collaboration, there's connection, and these are the things that help us to help nature to progress. This is the way I think, we as human beings, have to find a way to work together. And I think Celia, I respect what you're saying and I understand it.
I totally understand what you're saying too.
I feel very similar to you. I see myself as a human being first, but I'm aware that other people see me and they have a box. I'm aware of it. And so I think, and this is why I always talk about, this kind of social schizophrenia that a lot of people of different backgrounds experience in society, because they're who they are, but then they know that when they leave the house, that people perceive them a certain way. Right. And and that creates a challenge. And then sometimes you don't know what someone thinks, but you've made an assumption that they, I'm wearing a hijab, so someone thinks that I'm very religious, or I behave a certain way. Right? Like, what does it mean? Everybody, lots of different people wear hijabs, and you don't know anything about them. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, you know something, but you don't know completely about that person, right?
Yeah.
Well,
go on.
I think that's the whole two-headedness of DEI, right? So the I part, the inclusion, is all about, actually, I don't see you as a type. Right. But the diversity part is about valuing the difference that each human being brings.
Yeah.
And I kind of find myself nowadays living in both worlds, or switching between the two almost, kind of.
Yes.
That's why, to me, the diversity of values is so important. And again, I don't mean loyalty, integrity, all of those values. I'm talking about what is most important to each individual.
Yes.
I think that is so important. And once you have that, then yes, I talk about color blindness and all of that, but you are so right, Shay. I mean, it is the appreciation of all that is nature, and we are part of nature, no matter who we are, but we're all different.
Well, I watched a show, I think it was RuPaul's Drag Race, with my daughter, and we had a conversation, and I would think of myself as a person who is open-minded, and I love RuPaul. I knew him when, I didn't know him, but I knew him when he first started performing, and my daughter was challenging me on some of what we were talking about on gender and on sexuality and on, she's 16, so she challenges me all the time, but she was challenging me on what we were watching. And I thought to myself, this is great, because here's a person who is also starting to see and is starting to look at this from a new lens as well, about how you perceive the world, how you see the world, how you operate in the world. I think we lost Ishreen.
I think we did too. Oh,
yeah.
Hopefully she'll come back on.
Okay.
But I wanted to. You're so right, because I was taking I'm a veterinarian, but we were taking our little pug to the vet because we didn't have the drug to make her throw up, because she ate a whole bunch of mushrooms in the yard. Yeah. And So we're sitting in the waiting room, my husband and I, and there was somebody else, sitting far away. And this was, pre-COVID. And I don't want to be stereotypical, so please apologize if I offend anyone. However, the vet that came out, she was of the LGBTQ community, and she came out and she went straight to John and said, "Dr. Waterhouse," right, to my husband. Went straight to him, just didn't even look at me. And I said, "Well, I'm Dr. Waterhouse as well." And I saw the shocked, you could see almost in slow motion what her mind is thinking, that, oh gosh, something that I've hated, to be stereotyped as, women are lesser than men, had just done that, right? Mm-hmm. So it was quite an interesting thing. And again, I don't want to stereotype, but I thought it was interesting that she went straight to my husband and said, "Dr. Waterhouse," rather than to me.
Well, he
is Dr. Waterhouse as well, but I thought that it's hard to get rid of habits and what we've grown up with is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Now we are at 3:28 actually.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I have to hop on to another meeting.
No worries.
But I think this is the beginning of a conversation, because I feel like I think
For sure.
I wonder if we could actually have another panel, and maybe have a couple of men, and maybe even I can send a couple of questions ahead of time as well.
Yeah.
And because I think it's just such a fulsome subject, and maybe we need 90 minutes, to just to explore some of the all the other issues, because we were focused a lot on identity, and I know for diversity and inclusion, for so many people, that is about gender and sexuality and able-bodiedness, or and disability, and I think just being able to make a statement about that up front, I think, is also
absolutely
useful.
I think we knew up front that 1 hour was not going to, you can't solve this problem in an hour, but we can try.
Yes.
So why don't we, I'll end, but we should put it on the schedule to continue this conversation, no matter how long it'll take.
Okay, great. If we could do that, and I think that would be a better program for us to produce and send out. Do you know what I mean? Just because this is such a challenging subject. And so sometimes people will feel like, okay, you talked about diversity and inclusion, but you didn't represent me.
Yeah. Let's schedule part 2.
Okay.
And we'll carry on. All right, great. Ladies, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll get some men to join us next time. I think they were too scared.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Celia. Thanks, Jay.
Bye-bye.